So, Consider the Lobster by David Foster Wallace is a 2005 collection of essays. And just like the other, just in the same style of as the other nonfiction essay kind of oriented subject matter, like the supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, and both flesh and not, both flesh and not. This kind of, he is using more of a kind of less layered voice, I think, and more direct. So he starts off. There are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 essays throughout this, varying lengths. And the first one starts. He is called the Big Red Sun, and this one is about his. Wallace was basically kind of in a similar thing to when he was on the cruise ship. Was he's basically asked to by, I think it was not, I'm not sure what the Premiere magazine. Okay, so that was it. In '98, he ends up going to the AVN Awards, which is the Adult Video something. I think it's like the Adult Entertainment Video. I don't know what the N stands for, honestly. And who cares, honestly? It's all garbage, in my opinion. Anyway, so basically he talks about how it's the Academy Awards of porn, or pornographic. Um, and he talks about how there's the awards, and there's like an expo too. I guess they're all kind of related, adjacent, whatever. So yeah, he talks about in the he uses different pseudonyms in there too, and he uses different kind of, like, he uses like Harold Hecuba is like one of the kind of masked kind of things that he uses, the kind of pseudonyms he uses for one of the other performers. But yeah, he basically goes on in detail about how he visited this place, and it was just like really so over the top, like as you wouldn't expect. But he actually, I think he prefaces it, because it has been about 4 years since I read it. But it's some of his insights are so good that I've gone back and listened to certain parts over and over again. But yeah, he talks about how there's like a relationship between a kind of offsetting tragic one, if you think about it, between wanting to pornography, strong, especially like strong, like hardcore pornography, and like the struggle, like the inner kind of desire to like amass, like literally, like 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 um why am I like blanking on the word here? Castrate yourself, basically. So there's different people have tried, like how many different, he talks about like accounts of the correlation between like medical, how many men go in, like especially like increasing times, like just in the '90s alone. I think he talked about in kind of Regency, how many of them go into the EU, the emergency ER for like basically like sex related wounds, like basically from putting like their thingamajig inside a toaster, like that classic kind of thing. And I've heard more than one coworker joke like endlessly about that garbage. So like, oh, it's so overwrought. Um, but yeah, heck, I mean, Howard Stern's whole entire show like was like predicated on that in the '90s. I think like was just like the craziest person who did the craziest thing, and like and then get them on the show. Like anyway, so yeah, he talked about that and how that kind of prefaces the essay, and he ends up going to this place as clearly an observer, and he's just like the whole time he's just like talking about how like debased and how awful, like just the idea of like how this weird thing where most of the people, a good amount of the like the stars of the people, like the porn, like the studs, I guess, either recalled or whatever, they would be like the stags or whatever, I don't know what they would be like shorter men, like weirdly kind of shorter, just because like the it has something to do with like the camera angle and like getting a good angle and like having like a a bigger member or something that has to do something like that has something to do with it. It's all about kind of like the angle and like what's the best thing, or what's the best bang for your buck, literally, I guess. And then there's like he talks about how like all the starlet, that's what he calls the woman people in the industry, and how like everybody just kind of seems to be like lying to themselves in a way. Um, they're all like plastered on faces, like just like trying their best to like outdo one another with like different stupid things. Like I think one of them he mentioned was something like one of them was like had a it was called like the something or other, like literally like gangbang something 500, meaning that literally 500, I think it could have been more or less, I'm not sure. I think there's multiple of these are like literally so ridiculous. But yeah, like literally 500 people would consecutively you know um basically of not even meeting this woman before in their life, like total strangers, like let this woman let her 500 different people have sex with her in public, filmed by Ron Jeremy, or like hosted by Ron Jeremy or whatever. I don't know. And yeah, and yeah, you just see Ron Jeremy's own story, how he like, oh well, that was expected, his like great downward spiral and like sex offender stuff coming out now. It's just like, well, that's not surprising at all, like as it is with any portion, because like the whole thing, the blur between consent is now becoming so increasingly negligible, like you can't even see it, like it's just so, it's like, whoa, like, so Ron Jeremy did that. Oh, okay, well, that's not surprising. And it's like, not to validate it or anything, but it's just like this whole thing is like, it's just rigged for failure, I think. And I think that's what Wallace was getting at. Not just to be like, oh, well, I agree totally with, or that everything he was saying, that he wasn't saying, he didn't understand, like the immediacy of, just like with other elements of entertainment, like the immediacy and the accessibility of pornography. Like it's getting like worse now. And I think there's something he said interestingly, in like at the end of the tour, I think, or the of course you end up, I think, I can't remember what it was, but it was like in the movie, I actually think Jason Segel did a pretty good job as him. There were some like stuff they left out and things that I wish they would have put in there. And I think other things that they kind of, I felt like they emphasized too much, I guess, like the drug addiction and all that. I thought was like kind of a waste of time, but anyway, but yeah, so he was like talking about, I think this is straight out of Wallace's kind of playbook. I think what he was saying was like, if all this technology, if it's going to get so increasingly better and new and improved like gadgets and devices and all this, like he's going to have to leave the planet, otherwise like it's just going to get so much pornography already, like, and he is so right about that. And I was just be like, oh well, he's because there's different ways of like people claim like, oh, so and so such a prophet, and it turns out like they weren't really that onto something, or they might have been describing things in such a vague terms. But I think he was pretty on the ball with that. I think he hit the nail on the head with that idea that entertainment, like as he says, something you can adjust to, like it's like so like, well, did such a really mammothly good seller, although not many people might have actually taken up to reading it, but they just have it on their bookshelves. But anyway, but yeah, in that he's like, talks about the things that sound very similar, eerily similar to like Zoom calls, like how we have Zoom calls now, like like having over kind of holographic kind of perception of you, like being translated over or relayed over to another connection or whatever. Um, but yeah, which I guess with the internet being only like 5 years old, I guess at that point, was pretty impressive. So, but yeah, he talks about how prevalent this stuff is. Like it's getting more and more prevalent. It's dangerous. I think it's dangerous because this too much one thing, like anything in excess, I think. So when you try to like base a whole entire career off of it, and this is one of those things where it's like it's gonna have consequences. Porn stars go in, literally, like one of the things that he says there is like the amount of people that have, or actresses that have torn labias or other things not working in the right place. Gee, I wonder why. What they went into this industry and they agreed to get completely divested of dignity. And I know I'm saying all of this, like, the way I'm talking is completely from other people. Like, some people have no like barometric kind of Geiger counter on like what is. They're just like, whatever, whatever, it's boring, man, just whatever, who cares, just do it, like, it doesn't matter, like, nobody like cares what you do, like, just do it once. And I think I don't know, it could be all that, the Dostoevsky in me, it could be the Tolstoy I've read, it could be the moralists, I guess, in me, that wants to kind of not ban everything, but wants to kind of, at least, I know there's a difference between prescriptivist, and what's the other one? Descriptive. So I don't want to be like a totally normative and say this isn't. But as far as my ethics go, I think in a certain way it's best to kind of act as if such things are, because in a way, even if, and there's good reason to suggest that, neurology is, the compelling us to do everything that we do in our neurology and our this and our sex drive and our all this stuff is making us do all this horrible, like disgusting stuff. But even still, act as if, and this sounds like kind of a wager, like Pascal's wager. And I've recently got the Penzies too, so I've still got to read that. But yeah, with all that said, I think taking a little bit of a doubt, a tiniest grain of doubt, and just being like, well, what if there is some repercussion? What if there is, like, not just a well-being, like, okay, well, obviously pornographic, it doesn't fit into anything of the Sam Harris type of moral landscape, but, like, what if there is, like, what if there is, like, some intimation, or, like, some instant, it doesn't even have to be a philosophical kind of axiomatic thing, but what if beyond that there's, like, some spiritual essence of something, like something, and yes, like, I'm not trying to say that everybody, that sex is awful, in a Gnostic kind of sense. I think, actually, personally, I think that good and evil, and that there's elements of being able to be comfortable with one's sexuality without being. And it's tough too, because it makes me think of Jean-Paul Sartre and his brilliant analysis of in Being in Time, or sorry, Being in Nothingness, which is a response to Being in Time by Heidegger, kind of, at least it was issued as that. But yeah, he talks about how sex is such a difficult matter, and it's so messy because two partners agreeing to have relations with another is innately indicative, and begs the question of, like, the subject-object dialectic. And it's so easy for a man having kind of the higher, generally speaking, the higher, more potent, libido, to subject a woman, to objectify her, and for it not to be a totally honest kind of thing. So hence, that's, I think, why Simone de Beauvoir and Sartre actually had an open relationship, because it was like, oh, well, they're just gonna have fun. But I think for them, it was more so, like, not to say it, like, necessarily worked out, or they didn't still have jealousy or this or that. I think Camus even was, like, brought into that mix at one point. But yeah, I think he was trying to kind of negate that, or he's trying to kind of avoid that kind of thing, of the dilemma of objectifying someone, or, like, holding someone just in sexual value and using them, or even if it's, like, a thing where it's, like, it seems to be mutual, but when, like, it does, and, like, that with the whole, like, pornography, is that it seems to be such a, like, communal kind of consensual thing, but on its face, at least it seems like that, like, hey, we're just having fun, like, nothing more to it. But either way, somebody's walking out of it. So, like, the whole sadomasochistic stuff is, like, a prime example of how far gone the whole pornography thing is nowadays, because it's so freaking everywhere you look, it's everywhere. But yeah, it's because the main draw of that is the taboo. It's like, right, it's the whole this guy gets cucked, and like people like to see that because the thrill of a the more something is like off limits, the more people, negatively are suggested into wanting to see it. So it's like, and I have that similar desire to it. Like I feel like little bits of it, but yeah, that kind of thing is like it's so like whether it's men using women and them like I will I will do every I will please your every need, I'll do everything for you, I'll like I'll dress up like I'll like even like the kind of seemingly kind of innocuous kind of things like slave Leia or whatever, like that kind of thing is like a weird kind of thing because it takes place in an alternate not timeline of anything but just its own independent universe that has its own detached logic. So but at the same time, it's still a little bit troubling that there's so many girls that think it's just like it's a cute fun or whatever, and it's like fine or whatever, and like whatever. But like I think it's like this thing that people do, and to a more extent in pornography, where it's like I will do whatever the man wants most out of me, and it's like. But don't you know that the man might want you to do the worst, like might want to bring out the worst in you, like he might want to like whip you and do this, and it's like that's fun, that's why there's BDSM, and that's why it's so like weird, this whole BDSM thing. But yeah, that thing, and then it's like also another thing with like the whole this person, and Connor O'Malley, the comedian who's hilarious. He's probably one of my favorite kind of alt, kind of more recent kind of comedians out there. Because he makes like kind of it reminded me of the when he went to the AVN himself. I don't know if it was in New Jersey or something. Um, but yeah, like he was talking about how he was just like playing out the role of like this. He was acting as if he was like this like 20 like kind of like this like teenage-esque kind of juvenile like overly sexed up horny guy that's just going there like yeah, that was pretty funny. And yeah, Andrew Callahan of also had a thing where he went to an expo like this, and it's like had similar kind of things where just people they had this weird. It's like this weird thing where like some of the porn actresses and actors had a weird thing with like just off camera, on camera, whatever. When they're not doing their thing, it's like this weird thing where they can't even like sustain a conversation. I'm not trying to say like this is like necessarily indicative of they're horrible people or anything like that. I just think there's a weird thing of like they're just kind of like forcibly trying to like numb themselves to like everything that's not, I don't know. Because yes, I think sex, anything of one thing, so it's like anything of one thing too much, I think there's ways of having consensual, beautiful, experiences with someone you care about. But when it's with pornography, commodifies it. It turns it into something that's meant to be factory machine pushed out there for people's immediate pleasure, because it's like it has to up the ante every time. So it's like, well, what's gonna get them more taboo? So that's why we live in this weird paradigm now where everybody's like dealing with this. Everybody has to deal with it. It wasn't just a thing where you rent some porno tapes from so and so, like your best friends guys hanging out with the growing crowd and they work construction, they have porno tapes on hand. It's not like a thing where and even I was like slightly just lucky enough being born in the late 90s. I think I was born was like 96, so basically I was like right when the advent of like or rather the kind of off the final kind of little the remnants of like VHS were just dying out and DVD was just coming in. So I still kind of grew up slightly with a kind of mixture of both, like dial up, and like floppy disks and stuff were still kind of like a thing that I knew, like. But the technology now, it's like just like everything is way more ubiquitous, like one click, and like it's like pornography is accessible to like literally anybody who's capable of accessing, tablets or anything. So it's like very, very, very troubling, I think, especially if you're a parent too. So yeah, that was he talked about some more thing. There's one thing that was funny about that I think about sometimes. That one of the people, Wallace said that he observed one of the porn actresses who was singing a song And it was like a rock song with a hard rock edge kind of thing. Like it was trying to be a little bit of Bon Jovi and trying to be a little bit like AC/DC, I guess. And he was talking about how out of key and pitchy she was, and how she was trying so hard. And she was like talking about in the song, she was saying that, hey guys, this is a song about all those, it was, she said, sorry, psychomagnets. And he was like, um, all those people that think that they're you. And I was like, that was like, what the heck is she on about? She was like talking about, I guess, psycho guys that were like following her around, and just because they saw her in pornography, they thought they knew her, but they didn't know that she's like so much more than her where she is in porn or something. I think that's the impression that I was trying to get. But the whole time, the out of curiosity, I looked this up. If you look up, I think her name is like Deanna something. Um, yeah, I'm genuinely feigning ignorance. No, because no, genuinely don't know. But it was like something like it was yeah, it was psychomagnets. But if you look up that, I looked up like the 1998 just to get. I mean, obviously it's not graphic. It's just her singing, and revealing kind of dress or whatever. But it doesn't really show, But like it's more so. It's not even the lyrics were like that. It was just like her, and he was right. Wallace was right, dead on right about how, like grating it was. Like it was like odd. Like it was just like she was singing, and like his singing, not necessarily. It was like just it was like had a blues kind of it was like it sounded like something showed up on the wrong side of the town, and then yeah, it was like it wasn't like completely out of tune, but it was very pitchy. Like it was like very warbly, very. So, and she was trying to put on like this thing. It was just everything about it was just like I was like, no wonder like he thought this was so funny, because it was genuinely that bad. I think. Again, I'm coming from the through the lens of this, and like having been having read it at such and such a books and this and that, and having been raised in a sphere of looking out from that kind of outset, I guess, into their strange world of the entertainment kind of glitzy, tawdry, body, licentious industry of perversion. It's a in the art of perversion. Well, there is no art. I don't think there is. Sex is not art. Sorry. Even in my most postmodern influences, I still think sex is not tantamount to art in any way. Anyway, but yeah, but it does. Yeah, I think that it localizes and gives you free license to be like a totally perversion. So you're like, you can have any type of fantasy you want, anything you want, and it's like, no, it's like it's not like not there. That can't be good in my opinion. It's like set up for disaster. Anyway, so the second essay he talks about was certainly the end of something, or one would sort of have to think. So that's his review of John Updike's Toward the End of Time, and I actually have not read. This is my first hearing of Updike. Was reading this 4 years back, so I do remember him calling his like he talked about how Updike, he respected him as an author, and I think he even had like a signed photocopy or photograph from him, and I believe he talked he he had some level of admiration for Updike, but he thought his prose, his writing in general, was just kind of turgid, I think was the word he used. Like it was a little bit like a little bit like kind of flowy. And this makes sense because John Updike was a greatly influenced by Nabokov, and how Nabokov also had kind of a flowery style that was eclectic, and obviously you see a kind of similarity there, with and Nabokov was kind of on the precipice of almost being postmodern himself, because if you read Pale Fire, which I did a review for some time ago, I believe, it was written in such a way that it had a lot of narrative devices of framing events as if they're happening in a way in that the unreliable narrator of the Zembla from Zembla, I can't remember his name, but talking about the poet of John Shade, John Shade, I think, and how, how much he really knew him and that better, but in actuality he really didn't know the guy at all. So it's like kind of that kind of way of framing brilliantly is a very postmodern, kind of using stuff of, the fodder of Italo Calvino or Gaddis or Pynchon, but DeLillo too. But Nabokov also had a modernist kind of background of, in somewhat in the magic realistic sense, magic realist of like, part, like Turgenev, of his idols, of, even people that he had difficult relations with, like Dostoevsky. He was like not, he wasn't, he was critical of Dostoevsky, but he thought that The Double was also the perfect novel too. So, he was like influenced by him in some sense. Anyway, so yeah, he talks about Updike, who I still got to read. I have only read The Centaur by him, and I have a copy of Beck is Back after being recommended. The Beck trilogy, Bech, like a Bach with an E, and it is. I know nothing more about it than that. I do know The Centaur. It's been a little while, but I think The Centaur was like a kind of a little bit on the pedantic side, not in the bad way of, the myth of the Centaur, like this teacher of the classics, I believe, talking about reviving these kind of things, mythology of Hellenic period. Anyway, so yeah, some remarks of Kafka's funniest, which you have not, that has been removed, and this is like a very good, it's available online. Actually, I think I first heard it online. Remarks on Kafka. So, yeah, obviously, it says as it sounds. He's talking about Franz Kafka and his genius, and how a lot of people, I think he said that certain students of his, especially a little bit in the more kind of postmodern sense, have, I don't know what he said exactly, tend to think that Kafka is trying to get at something that's a little bit more serious than it sets on, because then he lets on. I think he's like talking about how Kafka laughed at his own novels, like The Castle too, like he was writing that, and I think Max Brod was talking about how loud Kafka was reading his own manuscript about, and how at one point, I think at The Castle, he was, or in the preface to it, that I think Brod and other friends of his remarked about how Kafka was at a meeting for some work-related kind of insurance-related kind of some type of matter, or it might have been a political thing. That was a local kind of politics group, like a town hall meeting. It was probably the equivalent of like a town hall meeting, in that the proceedings of it were so like auteur and like bizarre, like in a comical way, that Kafka couldn't help but like he couldn't help but laugh, break out in kind of chortles at it. At just the ridiculous how long it took for everybody just to get through like the kind of like baseline niceties and the rudimentary kind of things. And I've seen that kind of stuff too. I've seen like meetings and stuff in town hall meetings, and people get very irate and stuff like that. That's one of my favorite things to kind of watch in my downtime, or like stuff like the Hartford Parish kind of, what was the meme? The Hartford Parish. You have no authority, Jackie Weaver. People have like immemorialized that, commemorated that into legacy, because it is really great. It's just like the total like people like complete just both classic British passive aggressiveness, like, and a lack of clarity on anything, but like, and also just complete just total like ineptitude, is that just a total complete lack of coherence and like what was going on, like who's like why do people hate on Jackie Weaver, why was this person like this? I mean, context helps, but like the way, I don't know. Anyway, so but yeah, he was talking about how students thought that there was something that they would read something by Kafka as being ironic or something, or like something like, oh, that's an ironic gesture right there, and that Kafka was really trying to kind of embed more and more like layers of irony, whereas Wallace is saying like, no, that's not quite it. He was just, in this certain sense, it's like there's nothing more, like it's as, there is, definitely they were very esoteric in some sense. They're hidden with meaning, and he was definitely influenced by, I think, like the Kabbalah. I think if you hear like Jason Jeza or Giorgiani had a really great thing on Kafka. And he talked about how Jewish folklore and like the Kabbalah and like I think like is leading back all the way to the Zohar. I think is the name of the thing. The book of Zohar. Yeah, how that was a somewhat of an influence. So there's definitely kind of a mystical side to Kafka, but also it's not something that can be like kind of like ooh like spotted and kind of discreetly. It's like very very arcane, um, or at least that's my impression, and I might be wrong. So after that, some authority in American usage is talks about a dictionary of modern American usage. It's funny. I'm actually reading a very small, tiny little usage guide. I think it's called a study guide called "The Essentials of." I think it's called the Essentials of Style. I think, and it's by William. His last name William Strunk. Yeah, Strunk. Yeah. And E.B. White did a little addition to it, and yeah, he talks about usage too and all of that stuff because it's probably because Wallace has probably kind of got me into that, trying to better my grammar a little bit rather than kind of winging it, which is what I'm very much prone to do. Like I don't, like before a certain point, I didn't even know like what exactly constituted a positive, or suppos, or like transpositional or transpositive verbs, or transitional verbs, um, or like certain things like that, or like I knew kind of what independent clauses were, parts of a sentence. It can be broken up and then commas and then, but I also Strunk, like showed me that certain things like are also referred to as parentheticals, commas. Like you can use those as parentheticals, I guess. So, um, and yeah, precision isn't my thing. I'm very kind of like sloppily. I know like the first fact about tons of different things, like the first few facts, like the first iceberg tip of like a billion different things, and then yeah, and then occasionally I'll go really deep into something like like Jungian stuff. Like I kind of went deep into that a few years back, especially like during COVID. I just like went through like a ton of Carl Jung, but as far as like strict grammar, I like a few things here and there, but not much. Same thing with like languages too. It's like, oh well, I could learn French, and I did learn a tiny little first thing of it, like a tiny little volume of like 10-hour long thing on it. But and I still would like to learn eventually, probably more Spanish, I suppose. But anyway, so yeah, he talks about view. Okay, so authority on American usage. So yeah, he talks about descriptive and prescriptive, and